No, I feel like the essay questions are kind of an easier version of the first. Is yeah, everything's yeah, um, an easier version because it's just not going to like yeah. Although yeah, um, yeah, I think this is. I think it's manageable. It's just a lot of material, and I like. Yeah, she's. I'm just trying to figure out if I should make you sit in a line because I'm introducing Erica and then Patrick, Sahar, Jacob, Lena. Yeah. Tonya. Yeah, you're just going to raise your hands when I introduce you because I don't want you to have to like move around.
Is that the bio that you're going to have?
Yeah, but it's shortened.
Because I was going to say.
I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
They took mine from me. They took mine from me. From like my academic stuff, and I shortened it. And that was by the time I noticed it. No, I'm doing two lines. I'm doing two lines, and we're missing.
Annotate Wikipedia articles.
Oh. Hey.
Hi.
I'm Leslie.
Leslie, pleased to meet you.
Good to meet you. Oh, here we are. Excellent. Hi, I'm Leslie. Before you come up here, see that woman in the corner? We have to sign releases because you can put your stuff back there. We have to sign releases.
So I guess when we talk, we just.
Okay, 1 minute warning. Whoa. That did it.
I biked over here.
That did it.
Pretty long way.
All right, I'll get my other panelist up there, and we will go.
And you know,
This is like as hot as I can deal with. Anything more than this, it's just like.
Okay. Yeah, Janet, if you want to answer a question, so apparently, just because this is all we've got, we don't have enough individual mics and we don't have enough lavaliers, so we're doing this.
We just got to project.
Just project.
So project, whatever that means, project.
So that you're in the recording, and then when we do any other discussion.
is it alright if I open that window to try and get a little cross breeze?
I don't know. Let me ask. Can we open that window to get cross breeze a little bit? There is none. There's almost none here. I'm evicted from my offices down this hall, and after 2 o'clock in the afternoon this time of year, I'm gone.
Yeah.
I'm completely gone. It's quaint to be in this building, but I'll just keep saying it's quaint to be in this building. All right, let's get going because we have a lot to do. We are scheduled to go to 5:30. If the conversation is still going strong, I will let people go, but I will stay because at that point we should be talking about what we're going to be doing rather than learning from our guests. Can you all hear me? Because it turns out we don't have enough individual mics, but I'm mic'd, right? I'm mic'd. I've got a lavalier, I forgot. So I'm Leslie Harris. I'm visiting this semester. What are you doing? Are you telling me it's...
I thought she was giving you some sort of pose.
Ginny? I don't know what you're doing. Okay. I'm Leslie Harris. I'm visiting this semester. I wanted to quickly introduce Nick. Where's Nick? Nick Doty, who is a PhD candidate here and a founder of the Center for Technology, Society, and Policy here. And he announced that not only are they a sponsor of this event, but I think more importantly, they've announced that they intend to do some funding of student work in this area, which I'm very excited about. I think it really just opens up a lot of possibilities for all of us. Obviously, what we're hoping for is that today's discussion is a fire starter that's going to uncover some new ideas, lead to perhaps some collaborative projects among the students, civil society, perhaps even industry, maybe some new projects at the Samuelson Clinic. I discovered for the first time that Erica's project, without your consent, actually was stood up with the help of the clinic. I didn't even know that. Maybe some MIMS final projects, maybe a course. I think we should think broadly and we should think iSchool and beyond. The question we're going to explore today, I think, is pretty easy. It's gender harassment and abuse online. Not necessarily an issue that I imagined would be at the front of my agenda 20 years ago when the public internet was in its infancy. We certainly thought that this was going to be a space for free expression, where voices of marginalized people in the traditional media, women, racial and ethnic minorities, GLTB people, would be strengthened, and that human rights and democracy building would be enabled, and that we would have, and we do have, global communities that come together for common purpose. So to be fair, that vision, I think, has been largely realized, and we weren't naive. We understood that society's evils would come along with us, but to be fair, we were very focused on, we were concerned about child porn and trafficking, and I think very few of us imagined that literally the voices and opinions of women by themselves would become sort of a target in the medium. We certainly didn't think about trolls, cyber mobs, coordinated sort of misogynist activities aimed at women that would silence them and put them in fear for their privacy, their reputations, their safety, their future. One of the questions I'm going to pose to the panel after we start is like, why now? Why harassment and abuse and revenge porn now? Why are 80% of the harassers men, and more than half have no relationship to the women that they harass? What is it about women offering opinions online or daring to tread into traditional male domains that inflames the trolls and the cyber mobs? Gamergate was not an isolated incident. I just went back to my hometown paper, which I read online. It's as bad, DC, Washington Post. It's as lousy online as it turns out to be as it is in person. But I discovered that a female firefighter in Virginia last week committed suicide after a year of endless online abuse and harassment from people claiming to be firefighters, and that this is a thing in the firefighting community. I was pretty stunned. The Guardian released a study last week where they did a study of their comments and discovered that of the 10 people among their reporters and columnists who received the most vicious attacks through the comment section. 8 were women, 2 were minorities. And the 10 who got nothing but glowing reviews, all men. One journalist really wrote something in the Independent last week, which I found kind of amusing, so I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. She said, a woman's opinion is the short skirt of the internet. Having one and flaunting it is somehow asking for an anonymous mass of entirely male keyboard bashers to tell you how they'd like to rape and kill you. Is the growing misogyny and hate aimed at women online simply a manifestation of what has existed in all cultures forever? Is it something else unique to this medium, or is it a little bit of both? Or, as we get told over and over, is this just simply overblown? Just a debate about the limits of free expression. Are there really no rules online? And a lot of bloggers seem to believe that. And that we need to toughen up, as the word of one prominent tech blogger said. And if so, do we have actually a right to free expression online? So what's the normal now? Are we in a new normal, and how do we fight back? We have this amazing panel today to help us explore the whys of gender abuse, the range of actors, and the skills and strategies that can contribute to solutions. The full bios are on the website. People are not sitting in order of my introduction, so please wave or something. Let me start with Erica Johnstone. She's a partner in Ritter Costa in Johnstone in San Francisco. She specializes in representing people who have been harmed through the use of technology. She's a co-founder, Without My Consent, which educates victims of digital abuse to seek justice. Patrick Early is a senior community advocate for the Wikimedia Foundation, and he has been deeply involved in developing the responses to harassment and abuse on the Wikimedia platform. The fact that there is any on that platform is enough to amaze me. Sahar, Habib, is it Ghazi or Ghazi?
Ghazi.
Got it. She's the managing editor of Global Voices, a group that I completely love. She leads the virtual newsroom. She supports an international network of writers and editors and translators in 167 countries who write stories, real stories from their community and the issues in their community. And among other things, she has been a Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford, and that's a bit of a pattern here. Jacob Hoffman-Andrews works on EFF's, is it We Encrypt the Web? Is that what
Encrypt the Web.
Encrypt the Web initiative. He's worked at Twitter, he's worked at Google, and he wrote an anti-harassment Twitter tool called Block Together in 2014, which he continues to maintain. Lena Gunn leads the Content Policy and Abuse Prevention Initiative at Hypothesis. She co-founded, is it Sulabatsu? A social research cooperative in Costa Rica, and was part of the Twitter team that brought support to 35 languages in Twitter. Tonya Mosley, she is the award-winning journalist and another Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford, but she's the member of the winning team of the Affinius Labs No to Hate Hackathon about hate, which was sponsored by Google and Facebook this winter, developing an Activate Your Squad app that helps bystanders get involved in online hate and abuse. And finally, oh, Jen, you had it's like sitting at the little kids' table. Jen King, PhD.
When I graduate.
Yeah, well, you know, finish the dissertation, you get a picture. Candidate at the iSchool. She holds a master's degree from the iSchool. She is an expert in privacy by design. She has worked on Yahoo's community team on these issues, and she served as expert witness at the FTC, among many other things. But while she was serving as a faculty researcher at School of Law, I guess in the clinic, she helped advise RAIN, that's the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, with the creation of an online chat tool for survivors of abuse. So let's begin by setting the scene. How serious is the problem of gender harassment and abuse in your experience? And how are women being impacted? So, I don't know, why don't you start?
Okay,
I guess
great.
I'm gonna have to anoint.
So, Erica Johnstone, I'm a lawyer primarily at Ritter, Costa and Johnstone, and my specialty has become representing victims of what the media calls revenge porn, what we call non-consensual porn. And this started back in probably 2009, and I got some of those first cases with my future co-founder of Without My Consent, Colette Vogel. And basically there were women around the country who were the first victims of revenge porn, meaning their exes were posting naked images of them online and on these, revenge porn websites that were just starting to exist back in the day. And they would go to their personal injury lawyer, and he or she would not know what to do in their states. They would reach out to West Coast law professors who would refer them to our practice. So it was really awesome because we were first there, and we were able to sort of think through these technical issues about a Doe v. Doe lawsuit. And that's really confusing for a federal court, but these cases play out in state courts and more family courts where you have judges that are not terribly familiar with the internet and a lot of angst around like the speech and online issues. And so there were so many barriers to justice because whether you could proceed as a Jane Doe sort of depended on which judge you got. And then even if you could file a lawsuit, like all bets are that the defendant was judgment proof, so did the civil route make sense, and do we really need criminal remedies for this type of harm that's harmful to society when a particular class or group is being targeted because of their minority status or status in that group, and 90% of victims are women. That's what the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative study tells us. And so we really wanted to make materials available, and we thought we were talking to lawyers back in the day, back in 2009. But then it turned out to be this grassroots movement. And a lot of you have read Danielle Citron's Hate Crimes in Cyberspace. And Danielle is kind of this magical person where when we would get a bad result in a case, I would say, I'm really sorry, let's call Danielle. And she's interviewed maybe 50 victims of non-consensual porn, and those are the stories that sort of like fed her research and writing that she was doing. And so much has happened in, just the past 5 to 7 years. We spoke at South by Southwest in 2011, and people in the audience thought this type of abuse was still a one-off event. So yes, it's here, and all of you guys in the room know that it's really actually a problem. It's not a one-off event. And I think that one of the things I'd love to talk about today is let's break it down project management style into what are some things that we can all do? Because I've got checklists and we're ready to go.
I know you're ready to go. Does anybody else want to talk about sort of what their experience is with what's happening online on their sites, in their communities? I guess one of the questions is, we've looked at this, and Danielle looks at this through a very sort of US-centric legal frame. This is not just a US problem, although, in the US we'll have these debates that it's either the scope of our free speech, our permission to have anonymous speech, our absence of hate crime laws, our intermediary laws, and yet, is it any different elsewhere? Is it a different kind of abuse? Worse? Better?
So it is different, but it's the same in many ways. And going back to your original question, why now? I think it's not that, I think this was always a problem. It's just that in online spaces we see it a lot more because it gets scaled really quickly and people get a lot more witnesses to it, and you can document it. So before, if a woman was walking down the street, and most women in this room would have experienced this, whether they are in the US or some other part of the world, they're going to experience some sort of harassment. So that exists everywhere. But with online spaces, we just see it kind of scaled. And you mentioned non-consensual porn. Yeah. So I have worked half my life and lived in Pakistan and in other South Asian countries as well. It can be something so simple as not just non-consensual porn, but just a woman's images reappropriated. So like a simple image of a woman with a little cleavage showing can be reappropriated with captions, and that can become a huge source of harassment for women online. We have seen many women in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, and India deactivate their Facebook accounts because someone just posted a horrible photoshopped image of them on Facebook, something as simple as that. So the scale can be very different. And I wanted to kind of connect the dots here with how laws in the US can affect the rest of the world. For example, one of the spaces where we see a lot of this happening, maybe Twitter or even Facebook. Well, Facebook has a real name policy. Right now, most of the users, what they predict is most of their users are going to be from India in a few years. And what we've seen in India is that some users, especially women, female activists, feminists, they feel like they need a certain degree of anonymity to operate online, and Facebook does not work for them. So.
Yeah, well, that issue is one that's been coming up all over the world about whether or not it works, and deactivation of people, particularly activists, who need the protection at the same time. Let me go back just quickly, because I've decided that the one thing I really want to have happen is that we don't have the same debate about US laws, because we're in a different kind of space. But how much do you, as a person who represents people in this space, feel like our laws are a problem? I mean, how much do you think our
So there's a couple of problems around the laws. If all of the laws worked as they should, because they were enforced, then there would be less of a problem. So you want to train a couple of people. You want to train the judges in family courts and in state courts to use the tools that they have to issue restraining orders that cover digital abuse. They can do it. Do they? Not really. But we do have laws that allow them to do that. Like in the state of California, a restraining order can cover digital abuse. We also want to train law enforcement to be consistent in how these cases are handled. And the Attorney General, Kamala Harris, sort of made cyber exploitation a big part of her platform last year. And we made so much movement in creating educational materials for law enforcement. But still, most police officers are not trained in technology. So they can't investigate crimes committed through the use of technology if they're not trained in technology.
I want to hold on to that point
So we have,
as sort of for us.
In some spaces, we need new laws, like we have old school stalking and harassment laws that usually cover non-consensual porn, except where it's one tweet, because harassment covers a course of conduct directed at a specific person. And one tweet is just one thing, it's not two, so it's not a course of conduct, and it's not directed at a person, it's to the public. So in New York, the judge said, well, our harassment and stalking laws don't work, we really need a non-consensual porn law. So there's, a group that's working on getting those laws passed. So we know what needs to happen, it's just getting everyone on board with making the system work.
So let me move off of law and move to this idea of norms, of online and community norms. Some of you, I look around the room and I'll just say, some of you recall John Perry Barlow's Declaration of Independence in Cyberspace, which renounced the idea that laws from countries ought to apply and promised that there was a social contract on the internet based on the community's culture, ethics, unwritten codes that would provide for, quote, our society more order than could be obtained by law. So what happened? What happened to this idea of agreed upon norms and ethics? What norms are being developed and by who? And maybe I'll start with the platform folks on that. Sure. Why not?
Yeah, so I don't know, I'm here with Wikimedia, which is Wikipedia and all those other great sites. And who here has spent any time editing on there or talking on there? No one? You have? It can be pretty rough and tumble, and so I think this sort of shows that that philosophy was a bit idealistic, in that it's very tempting to be cruel and be painful to other people when there's zero consequences for doing so. And especially when the stakes are a little bit high. In Wikipedia, you can sort of influence how a person is portrayed publicly, or a historical event is portrayed publicly. And so when the stakes are a little bit higher online, that's when things really start to fall apart, when people feel that they can use psychological manipulation methods that they wouldn't use in real life because there'd be consequences for doing so.
Are women targeted
Well, I
particularly?
mean, in the Wikipedia world, they're only targeted when they show up because we have so few. We have horrible rates of, and diversity problems as well, but about 85% of Wikipedia editors are
So
male.
women show up and they're giving opinions while female
and leave usually.
Yeah.
Sort of a good case study would be that we have some sort of advanced rights holders in the Wikipedia world, the sort of grand poobahs of Wikipedia, and a few of them are women. And you can probably just look at their talk pages to see the difference, compare the male, or the people who identify as male and the people who identify as female. And you can see it in real time, the amount of random abuse that these women are subjected to. And it's the whole spectrum. It's truly vile stuff to will you marry me stuff.
So how do you set norms? I mean, I guess I hear this and I think I would have expected, in this big online space, that communities that come together around a common purpose, share some common values and goal, might be different. But, I mean, explain a little bit about hypothesis, because it's sort of, this stuns me. I have to say, I was kind of amazed to discover that Wikipedia was as bad as the rest of the internet.
Yeah, I think
Maybe
it's stunning for everybody,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
So I work with Hypothesis. It's a very small nonprofit startup. We make open source software to annotate the web. What could go wrong with that, right?
Yeah. What could possibly go wrong?
So I think one of the reasons why the platforms there was a generation, as John Perry Barlow, who by the way is on our board, wrote this very idealistic manifesto. It's because at that time I have a feeling that the people who were citizens of the internet were very white and very male. And
Wait a minute. Children are citizens.
Of course. Not all of them, of course. But a
yes,
very
that's
homogeneous community fails to see how that will be broken very easily.
I think that.
And I think even the platforms we have now were created by the same people. People who usually come from a privileged background, usually male, usually white, who just don't see harassment happen throughout their lives.
So is it that they don't see it, so they don't plan for it, or they don't think it's harassment? Because certainly there's one pushback that sort of says the web is different and we don't have any rules, and, man up, I believe, is kind of the, what.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. But also it's because a lot of these platforms, honestly, like the product managers and founders, when you talk to them, they spend all of their days thinking, how is my product going to make the world a better place? It's really hard for them to think, how is my product going to make the world worse, right? How is the thinking is very counterintuitive. So people who usually work on abuse and who, set the alarm, and I'm looking at Julie sitting there, I usually push back because it's negative thinking, right? That doesn't have a place in the fun, positive world of startups.
Do you all agree with that? Has that been your
I want to
experience?
second that. Having worked at a large internet company prior to social media, 2002 to 2004, the culture there certainly is one of forward thinking. It's male dominated. It's not interested in these issues. It was not then. Maybe that's changing. But the reactions were all about compliance. And to some degree, there were libertarian in values, I think, enshrined. This idea that the companies wanted to respect the First Amendment, not necessarily tread on people's individual speech. But harassment issues, abuse issues, really are part of the toxic waste that these companies produce. And so it is seen from the product management side as a liability. It's expensive, it requires customer support, and so it's been something for the lawyers and the customer service agents to deal with offline and not brought back into kind of the product development cycle. And I would say the biggest change from when I was working in the space to now is the fact that it used to be, for instance, in Yahoo groups, which was one of the areas that I was part of, this type of behavior occurred all the time. But in a Yahoo group, it's basically a closed group. So there could be a lot of horrible images being traded between people, but it wasn't getting out to the broader internet. That's a huge change today. And I think one of the reasons why we're seeing more of an interest in this issue is the fact that women have access to a platform that we didn't have before, and our voices are actually being heard. It's just that they're being shouted down when we're talking. But in the past, a lot of this occurred kind of offline, in secret, under the rug, and now it's coming out in a way where when you have people interacting online, it's fundamentally disrupting some of the social interactions that a lot of these companies depend on in order for their products to be successful. And so we're finally seeing this come to the front because of that.
So, I guess what I'm hearing is companies are happy to have terms of service, but actually enforcing them or mechanisms to create or encourage the creation of norms. Who's supposed to be creating the norms here? I had one big company tell me it was the users, and I was kind of figuring out how they all got together and did that. But
well, I mean, our users do get together. I mean, because
yeah, so talk about that, because you still have this problem, but you also are one of the few places that actually.
Yeah, and I mean, like Wikipedia, it's not the same as some of these others because it's a nonprofit that runs it, and it's the community does take it to heart that they have that responsibility to set those norms, but it does start to fall apart in practice. Like if you go to English Wikipedia, it has this wonderful civility pillar, and it's quite aspirational. It has great language in it, but it ends quite quickly. It's 3 sentences, and it doesn't really tell you how you're going to create the civil environment. And I think that is where our community struggles day in, day out, because we do have that's I won't call it a libertarian ethos, but an ethos that,
I think it is.
or it is sort of a libertarian ethos that everyone should have the right to participate, everyone should have the right to express their opinions, and somehow that doesn't translate to making sure that everyone has the right to express their opinions. And so, and also in practice, it's always very local. It's, one little project is having a problem with one user, and so it becomes sort of a little debate or a virtual fist fight between this local group. And I think that's where the sort of, expecting a global community to sort of create a cohesive community that respects these values is terribly difficult, because people do tend to go back into sort of parochial layers, because it's just easier.
I think it's really interesting, and many of the folks here on the panel have brought this up, but what's happening online is symptomatic of the ills of society. I mean, I've been a journalist for 16 years, so quite a long time, and really it was the beginning of, when I first started, it was the beginning of folks being able to post online their comments after stories on news websites.
Right.
But prior to that, I'd go out and do a live shot and come back, and there'd be these anonymous messages on my phone.
Oh, seriously?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was before they could write them anonymously on the story. So then we got to the point where the stories would be posted after they aired on television, and immediately there would be these anonymous comments. So I really think that when we're talking about how to solve this problem, I mean, we're talking about a societal problem, and this is the mechanism. And so when you're talking about ways to combat it, it really has to start at the creation of these tools, a way to make that. And so to your point, I mean, you can't, it's very hard to put a Band-Aid on things once they're already in motion, once there's a system in place and a way that people use the product.
So I guess I have one question. There's sort of two communities that we sometimes talk about. We tend to talk about, something's happening to a woman. And so we have two things. One, we have like, who the heck are these trolls? Which I think is a question we don't address very much, which I'd like to see what people know. And the other is, what do we know about bystanders? I mean, obviously, bystanders, forth. One of the, there's this whole, how do you turn bystanders into upstanders? And it's been this question out there in the real world for a very long time. And it goes back to, I think it was just the anniversary of the Kitty Genovese case where, all these people listened to this woman be murdered. In all of that time, in the offline world, the question of people witnessing domestic violence or sexual abuse and responding remains an intractable problem. So what do we know about both of those things here? Trolls? I mean, are they just the same people who called you on the phone before? I used to get letters. People used to be more literate. I got actual letters.
Those would happen every once in a
Yeah,
while.
I used to get letters.
People, at this point, it's so much easier to follow than write online. I'm very interested in the social sciences and social psychology part of it.
I am too.
And when you start to talk about the bystander effect, really when it comes to the online space, and you brought up that I was part of this Affinis Labs,
Yeah.
we came up with this tool. It's not really an app, but it's more so a tool to help combat this. Really what it does is try to make bystanders upstanders, but in a way where people feel empowered by numbers. So essentially, it's already happening on Twitter. There is a very prolific writer, Jamel Lemieux, and she has a huge Twitter following, and she's always being attacked on Twitter. But she has her core group of people who intervene when she's in trouble. So if she tweets out something and she gets attacked by a couple of trolls, then her friends will kind of come in and kind of take that conversation over. So we were trying to take a look at how we can make this something that everyone can really use. Maybe with just a few clicks or a click, you can have your squad mobilized in a way to help you. And we know by the bystander effect that if there's one person or two people who are already coming to your aid, the others will flood. We know that they're leaders and they're followers. So that's kind of where that concept comes in.
So it's kind of interesting. I mean, you built a tool for Twitter that not only allows you to block, but it enables other people in some ways to sort of state their position on this by blocking as well. So I think what I'm hearing is that this idea that people who don't know you or have nothing to do with you would somehow jump in the middle of one of these incidents may be a bridge too far, but that we can figure out ways that the communities we already have can be brought to bear. And that's probably different than a lot of the thinking about bystanders in the past. But I see that that both of you have kind of gone in that direction. Do you want to talk about your app?
Yeah.
And it's been around, so I'm curious, like, what you think the impact has been.
Totally. So I used to work at Twitter in anti-spam, and so I worked closely with the Trust and Safety group, which was awesome. We definitely saw a lot of people getting harassed, and Twitter's kind of official line at the time was use the mute, actually mute didn't exist yet, but use the block feature. You don't have to see the stuff you don't want to see. But on the other hand, I followed lots of women who had really great stuff to say, especially about sexism in the tech industry. And I would see them disabling their accounts and saying, I can't take the harassment anymore.
I did it. I left CDT. I set up my personal account, and at the moment I was supposed to press it, I couldn't do it. And they're still coming back to me sort of saying, where are you, where are you?
Yeah.
Happy, free.
So
no trolls.
Yeah, right. One of the recurring things I would hear women say is, block isn't enough. I get 100 people a day or more attacking me. I can't block 100 people a day. And so I was looking for ways to automate and reduce the burden there. And there was a great exemplar called the Block Bot, which was organized by a bunch of trans people who had a forum, and they also often had Twitter accounts, and the trolls, after they locked down moderation on the forum, the trolls moved to start attacking them on Twitter. And so it was a very similar tool. Here's a list, click here to block everyone, but it was maintained for like one community. So Block Together generalizes that idea. You can say, essentially share my block list, and you get a URL you can give to your friends or your followers. And if they sign up, it will block everyone on your list and do it on an ongoing basis. The other two features, which are arguably even more popular, are auto block. So if a new account, less than 7 days old, mentions you, they get insta-blocked if you opt in. And if an account with less than 15 followers mentions you, they get insta-blocked. if you opt into that. And that helps the sock puppet problem.
So do we know if it's working? I mean, you haven't really launched, you're just launching your app, right? Right. But do we know whether it makes a difference? Does it change the behavior of trolls? Is it enough of a, I mean, this is what I feel like we haven't been able to do yet, kind of do this level of like research into the, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in here. So we've seen tools like this all over the world now.
Right.
There's one in Colombia called Alerta Machitrol. So
yes, I know Machitrol, but
yeah.
Yes.
So a Machitrol is a chauvinistic troll. So in that, what you do essentially is if someone is harassing you online, you tweet this like scary-looking troll, like a badge, to them, and then you also alert the group and then everyone, and you share screen grabs of the harassment, and then everyone kind of, you activate your squad to kind of combat it.
So that also has like a shaming element too.
Yeah.
And I know that like in training of men, you know, in this movement that has happened offline about, you know, supporting women in situations, that naming it, shaming it, and getting people to claim it is sort of like the, you know, we're moving from social psychology to actual psychology, but the thing that interested me about Machitrol was that it wasn't just that a bunch of people came at you, that you were able to like take a screenshot, put that thing on there, and send it out. So do you know if it works?
It does work, and there are apps like this like all over the world now, and I wanted to talk about a few more campaigns.
Yeah.
One of them is Take Back the Tech, which was started by the Association of Progressive
Yes.
Communication back in 2006. It takes place all over the world, in dozens of countries, even in Pakistan. The first time I heard about Take Back the Tech was in 2006. And what they do is they actually go to campuses, university campuses, and they train women in being safe online and how they should handle harassment. So back then, I remember when I was a journalist in the newsroom, the saying was, "Don't feed the trolls." But that's not the best way to handle trolls, actually. And I've engaged with many trolls over the years. And what I've seen is that, you know, there's always a point where okay, maybe I need to back off and I need to gain help activate my squad. But sometimes engaging with them, like on a personal level, like making them feel like doing a little bit of forensics and kind of seeing their background, just saying a little information, many of them go quiet. So there is an element of calling people out that I think is,
Yeah,
it does
I'm
exist,
curious
it does
about
work.
that, and I actually was going to try to talk to somebody who runs one of those men's groups, but I didn't have a chance. But so,
I'm just going to add, I think we do see the flip side of that sometimes, where these folks, whoever they are, wherever they are, they see sort of any attention as a validation of what they're doing, or it can encourage them. And some of these people like a challenge too. You know, you put a block in front of them and they're just like, oh, I have to figure out a way to get around this. And sometimes it can escalate to the point where, you know, this person is obsessed with what they're doing now because not because of what you've done, but because they have seen it as this almost interactive game.
well, so this interactive game thing comes up. Jen, you were using Why We Can't Have Nice Things in your class, which has some really, by the way, we actually have this big resource list, and everything you're hearing about is on it. So what do we know about trolls? I mean, because I'm not sure it's necessarily the same people who abuse women offline.
I don't think I'm quite the expert on trolling in particular. I've had my own trolls. I think
We all have our own trolls.
Maybe some trolls at some point. My knowledge on kind of what to do really doesn't extend past some of the academic research I've read.
Well, but just, I mean, I'm just curious based on what you've read, who are these trolls? Because I think there is this game playing aspect, this kind of like isolated person playing games and somehow not actually like connecting this to like what the implications are on the other side.
I mean, I think there's the stereotype, which is like the lonely guy in
Yeah.
the basement. I don't know how true the stereotype is, but honestly, the best thing I've listened to and read on this topic was a piece on trolling on This American Life, which some of you may be familiar with.
I already know where you're going to go with this. This is an excellent story.
Yeah, it is really.
You go first and then you go on. It's
excellent story of a woman who's being harassed, and I apologize, I do not. details. Yeah, I don't remember all the specifics, but she actually contacts her troll, who was the troll posing as her dead father?
As her dead father.
Oh,
Her father
God.
had just died a week prior before.
Yeah, I think he hijacked his Twitter account and was posing as her dead father. Yeah, just really odd. She was able to confront this person, and he eventually talked to her, and it recorded it, and it turned into This American Life episode that I highly recommend listening to. But I think in some ways this speaks to like who the troll is and what their motivation is, even though it's only one person. Like really listening to this conversation, I think really brings out some of the dimensions that I would argue are likely universal in trolling that I've read in other sources. So I would point, I don't recall the name of the episode, but This American Life, I'm sure if you search on trolling, it'll come up. So what are the dimensions though?
Well, what was really interesting about that piece, and I can tell you because it resonated so deeply with me, it aired last year this time. So it was last April,
We'll find it.
towards the end of the month. This guy had, to your point about the abuse of guys and then the guys going online, no, I don't think it's that literal, like that, okay, you abuse in real life and you don't. This guy was a normal guy, was severely unhappy, and he had some other things in his life that were really making him unhappy. And so he was going online. He was bothered by her as a feminist and the work that she'd done on the online space of Twitter. And so there were lots of different psychological components and like really complexities to his life. But ultimately, I think that is the thing, is that I'm almost confident, I'm sure that there are people in this room who have trolled before. So you think that you're inside of a room, a safe space. People, different points in their lives, different places in their lives. I'm no expert in this, but I believe that online offers you a sense of anonymity, that you can actually do these types of things. Depending on where you are in life, you may choose to act out in that way.
Yeah, because part of his self-reflection in the conversation was the realization, I think, that he didn't really consider himself a troll, or didn't really grasp that what he was doing was so harmful, even though he'd done this horrible act, but he just didn't quite connect the dots. So I don't know if it's a lack of self-awareness, like just a fundamental one, but it's a really interesting thing to listen to.
Lena.
Well, in the research that we've been doing on designing our own system for dealing with abuse, we've talked to a lot of people who are also trying to redesign comments online, right? The Coral Project, and there's a full conference on it called Beyond Comments now.
Oh, really? When is it? When and where is it?
It just happened a couple of months ago. And what we've been hearing from the people we've interviewed is that trolls are just regular people. They're not aggressive people who wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do something horrible to women, right? I'm ruining someone's life. So many of these tools that we use in platforms are so engaging because they reward certain behaviors. So I used to work at Twitter, but one that I think rewards certain behaviors is Twitter. You make a snarky tweet and you literally get little hearts. People who like you or find it funny. Now there's kind of like this passive-aggressive mention a tweet instead of retweeting it and adding your own commentary to it. There's a lot of reward in being snarky and snipey and smarter than everyone else. So I don't think, it's people who are especially bad or especially horrible, is that they are rewarded for that behavior by a mass of
That's
other
interesting.
users.
I mean, that has a lot of implications about design and...
And even I talked to one of our users, and our tool is super innocent academic tool that people use to annotate papers, right? And one of our users was telling me, well, I was reading this article and I found this line that was extremely offensive. So my first impulse was to highlight it and curse at the author and say, I demand a response and I need you to say something about this. And then he thought, no, I'm using a tool I use for university. This is not the place, right? So he deleted it and didn't say anything. But it's just basically everyone can do that given the right conditions.
Yeah. I mean, like, I could think of, like, I sort of went through my precocious provocative stage before the internet, and I was mostly sort of political and anti-religious in the things that I said. But you know, I was immediately sort of bombarded by hurting people with my statements because I was making them in real life. Even Sunday school, if my mom's watching this, and it became readily, very quickly apparent that my words had destructive effects on people. And I think the internet, of course, masks a lot of that. It masks the pain that people feel. But as Lena was saying, it's all of a sudden you get these little validations popping up that didn't happen in real life. Like when I said something really jerky in university, you know, people would gasp at me, but the people who might have agreed with me, they had no way to sort of tell me that they agreed with me. And so, you know, I think some of the structure of the internet really sort of rewards that and perpetuates it. You know, like I grew out of that fairly quickly, but I don't know if people are growing out of it now because they're getting this sort of dopamine reaction to it that keeps it going a long time.
So what are the, I'll use a cybersecurity term, what are the countermeasures? I mean, if we're building this whole thing in a particular way to reward, what are the ways, we have sites that are moderated, do any of you know about sites that like actually say something to somebody at the time that something's going on? We have some students working on that right now, so I'm curious about that. How much does moderation mean any kind of real-time consequence or statement, or is it all somebody complains, it goes up into the Department of Complaining, and at some point it comes back down? Yeah.
Well, I think Pinterest does a really great job of teaching what the terms of service mean, and maybe that's like the missing piece where we need you is terms of service, just words, words, words. But then Pinterest gives examples, like this is what this means, this is okay, this is where we draw the line, this isn't okay. And I think that you just understand a little bit more when you see those very concrete examples. And going back to our last conversation about who are the trolls, Fusion did this really awesome video journalism piece about like this Section 230 kingpin living out of his trailer, and there were all of these like revenge porn victims that were sort of pleading with him to take down the photos, and you know, he just didn't get why they felt so entitled to ask him to do this, like this was his livelihood, it was legal, until he met Anne-Marie Ciarni, and she just sent a video, and he was sobbing and changed his policy. And it was this weird lack of empathy that he couldn't understand the harm to them until he actually met one. And I don't know if there's something that the school can work on to sort of like bridge that connection, but that would be great.
It's a really interesting question about.
It's kind of a restorative justice in a way.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know how you get that, you know.
And the tools I've seen closest to this vein are actually on Facebook, and I want to give specific credit to the person who helped develop them, which was Arto Bahar, who I used to work with at Yahoo. He started the Facebook compassion team, and he individually, I think, as long as, you know, of course it's a much bigger team now, he's no longer there, but they've really done a lot of interesting work on trying to mediate interpersonal disputes on Facebook and trying to communicate emotion through the tools they have and to try to identify the interpersonal issues that come up the most often and often suggest kind of ways to frame the discussion for people. And we just talked this last week in our computer mediated communication class, and a few people have tried them. And in some cases, they actually give you text to send to someone else about removing a photo that you're displeased about them using. So some of it's kind of hand-holding, and it's tutoring people in how to actually communicate. Because I think one of the things that, from a design perspective, we really sometimes underestimate is just how poorly these tools work for human communication. They're often really bad. And just how awful text is as a communication medium online. So a lot of the lack of empathy, I think, is often just reflective of the fact that text to text is just a horrible way to communicate. And emojis may not solve the problem, but they might help.
Oh, no, not emojis. I don't want to give up emojis. Let me turn this conversation around by asking you briefly to just start talking about, and students get ready to start talking about, what kind of help you need, what kind of work could happen that brings the skills of the iSchool. We've got some people here from the law school. We've identified that we don't have, I like the idea of calling them restorative justice tools, ways for people to be brought together safely. That's one. We've talked about the complete lack of understanding of all of this in law enforcement. You're talking, about courts. A lot of stories that Danielle has talked about is going to local police who don't know what an IP address is. So there's this other whole education, training piece that I know is missing as well. What else do you need? What should happen? Go on, Erica, ask for it.
So, Without My Consent, we're currently writing a Something Can Be Done guide. And basically, this is a download of everything we've learned from litigating these cases for the past 7 years that will create a path to justice, given the tools that we have. So the first iteration covered how to organize yourself as a victim, because that's a barrier. Like when I get an email from someone that is rambling, I stop. And I'm really open to those emails. And so you get help when you can create almost like a chart, and we call it Without My Consent's evidence chart, where it shows that you've saved your evidence as a PDF, and we teach people how to do that. And we even give like sample statements as to how to describe the event and when it happened, and all of the relevant information that I would need as an attorney, or that a police officer would need, or that your judge would need, so that you fill out a chart, attach it to your restraining order request, and go to court. And so what we're trying to do is break it down and do a lot of hand-holding and how this works. So there's how to preserve evidence, how to tell your story, how to register the copyright in your private parts. There's a lot of headlines about like, is copyright the solution to revenge porn? Well, we go through that, and I show at the end of the day what a sample copyright registration for your private parts looks like.
And I think it's great information, and from an iSchool perspective as a site, not so much. Not so much. Not a way that you could easily navigate and interact. And I looked at that information and thought, wow,
so
this could be really useful to a lot more people.
Here's the thing. It's like great content, but it's words. And like, it's hard for someone who is passionate about this to read so many words. So that's where you guys can absolutely step in. And what's the eye candy? What makes it pop? How do people really intake information? And what are the tools that we have? If you know how to do that stuff and are looking for a purpose, like let's pair up, because we got some good stuff.
Other thoughts? And then I want to hear about what students are already starting to do. And then
speaking of preserving evidence, it reminds me of another Twitter-based project I've been wanting to start. I've seen people complain that often they'll get a wave of attack, and then the attackers will delete their tweets, and they can't get the evidence, or they can't convince anyone it's real. And it's actually relatively straightforward to authorize an app that can receive all the mentions you get and archive them, both locally, and it can upload them to the Internet Archive. And I think this could be done with like a month of programming work. If anybody wants to get involved, I'd be happy to help out or advise.
let's talk a little bit. Yes, Deirdre, start a fire.
Well, one is on the empathy issue. So Nick was one of the students who got the Google glasses kind of early on, and I was like, as a parent, I was like, oh, you can literally make your kids see things through other people's eyes. Like, I mean, like, what's the perfect, right? It's the perfect thing. And so I'm wondering, it would seem that there's a pretty good capacity to think about empathy building, right? And that ability to like flip the frame. And I'm wondering what sort of activities. There's the naming, claiming, blaming, but then there's also like, even if it's a personal shaming, like this is what you look like. You all seen Monsters Inc. Scully sees himself and he's like, oh, that's what I looked like when I was scaring the crap out of a little girl, right? And he's like, oh my God, I can't ever be that again. And I do think in reading Danielle's book and listening to some of these other, like This American Life, you get the sense that there are some people who just like, they lose all perspective on how they're behaving, and they need a little, like, here's a mirror, come back to reality. And whether or not you've seen any of that sort of activity. And then, can I ask two questions? Then the second question is, it seems that you're letting culture off a little easily. And I don't know if anybody else read, there's a book that I really appreciated called Big Girls Don't Cry about the Clinton-Obama election. And just like the level of kind of vitriolic attacks that even somebody, in public life was experiencing, and misogyny and stuff like that. And there was this story, and it may also have been on This American Life, about a pop star in Korea whose naked photos were breached. And basically everybody reacted and said, don't look. Like, there was I think a US-based site that decided to post them. None of the Korean sites would put them up. And people basically shamed the site for doing that, which seemed like a really, and I may be getting the specifics a little bit wrong because I'm known to do that, but there's this level of cultural tolerance that seems to be kind of I know misogyny exists everywhere, but that doesn't mean that there's not kind of a cultural component. I'm just wondering about that. And,
Well, to your first question, I'm kind of conflicted about the idea of blame and shame. When you were talking about holding the mirror up, yeah, really what I see it is like holding the mirror up to the victim for the troller to see. In that case, in This American Life, what it was is that him hearing her voice and her say, this really hurt me, and her tears actually made him realize that she's a human being in a way that he hadn't seen before. And you think that it's obvious, and I think you brought up a story, I think you think it's obvious that, yes, I'm a human being, and you put my dad's picture up and pretended to be him on Twitter would hurt me, but it's not. But I wondered how that would have turned around if she attacked him and said, how dare you do this to me? And
I'm not thinking about, I'm literally thinking about being sharing the experience, and it could be how you do the empathy or the repositioning.
yes.
So Deirdre, it's interesting that you're raising that, because another thing has developed in the last couple weeks that I thought was interesting, and that's that a lot of women in journalism, including on television, who get this stuff all the time, have started reading them on the air, right? So there is something about taking the power away from the impact by doing that. It's, definitely something that people use in the sexual assault and other areas, but I thought it was really interesting of taking the power out of the attacks. Now, that doesn't, if you look at some of the cases that Danielle Citron has talked about where they continue, and we're talking about mobs that could be thousands of people, and they continue offline and include doxing and, so many other things, I don't think that works. But but you're putting this face who's willing to say those comments back and talk about it. So I feel like there's something there that also involves bystanders, because they can be really brave given where they're sitting, but a lot of people kind of can't.
Can I address your second question with a bit of the first? So in Pakistan and in many other countries in the global south, what we've seen is that it's very important for there to be an online and an offline component. So what I've been seeing is that a lot of these closed feminist groups on Facebook, for example, they also have public Facebook groups, which are they're about public organizing of women. And in Pakistan, there's a page called Girls at Dhabas. Dhabas are tea shops, which are predominantly male spaces. So women go to these regular roadside tea shops, and they sit there and have a tea, and they take pictures and they post it on Facebook, and that encourages other women to reclaim public spaces. There's a similar campaign in Egypt called Sidewalk Stories. So women go to sidewalk cafes, yes, take pictures, reclaim those public spaces. So I think it's very important to use the internet to get that courage to make those cultural shifts that should have existed. And I know why it exists in Pakistan. It's a former British colony, and we've just seen back in the day, during colonial times, women would be shuttled from private spaces to private spaces, and then that just continued. And so there's this delay in kind of reclaiming public spaces, and I feel like the internet has really helped make that happen. In the last year, ever since Girls at Dhabas is launched, I've seen multiple events about girls just riding their bikes through cities, which would never happen before. It's kind of taboo for a woman to ride a bicycle or a motorbike, but we see all of that happening now. There was a government-sponsored motorcycle rally with women. So change happens really quick also, so that's the flip side.
So we have to figure out how to ride some bicycles across the internet. Yeah.
I actually have a question over here.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is a question mostly for Jacob. There's a grand tradition of user innovation, and a lot of those amazing innovations end up being incorporated into the technologies that they have put active. So thinking about things like Blockbox and Block Together, did that have to originate outside of Twitter? And why hasn't it been formally incorporated into Twitter? And because you've been on the inside and are on the outside now, I think you probably have some insight into that. And also in terms of the prospects for our students, they could go get hired as a trust and safety team at Twitter. And is there any promise that they can make change internally, or is that not the right place to go?
Yeah, I think I could have written that tool at Twitter. Nobody would have objected, and I would have had more power to push it into the mainstream project. But I didn't have time. I was on a different team, and there's only briefly been an engineering team dedicated to fixing these problems, and it was very small. And I think it's about funding and hiring people who understand the problems and giving them the power to fix it.
And deciding to do that. I mean, as Jen says, if this is like the trash and they don't want to deal with the trash.
Seen as a cost and not a benefit.
The cost, et cetera. What's happened to our other, oh, hi, great.
Hello, I'm Katie Gunn. I work on the safety team at Twitter.
Katie! Come on down!
Unfortunately, I'm just here to listen, not to speak to Twitter. But I would like to invite everyone in the room to email me your thoughts on what Twitter can do better. I know it's a long list of things. So I'm at kgunn, K-U-N-N, @twitter.com.
I think they should email you about how they can work with you, because there's a lot of student projects to be done. Hiring, well, they're still in school, but they need to be hired. They need to be hired, yeah.
Yeah, I had another question. So the general trend of internet services in which we see cases of online abuse, the general trend of proliferation of information rather than suppression of it. So it's architecturally more conducive for you to share more information than to suppress. So Facebook has a share button up front while the report abuses inside a tiny arrow, and then also Reddit, for example, promotes content based on upvotes, so it's not metrically conducive for it to be civil. So that's why, I mean, even Reddit kind of branched off, and a co-founder or someone is starting a new, more civil kind of a forum for the internet called Kinsey. But my question is that, is the architecture of the internet inherently flawed to stop bullying?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
That takes us right into design, something.
That's something that we struggle with a lot, because anonymity brings so many good things to our project. It allows people, to say, from Iran to edit articles about politics in Iran. I mean, if they could do that, if the Iranian government could find them quickly, they would not do that. And of course, it allows the flip side of that, so much destructive behavior. So for me, the big question is, how could we build an architecture that allowed the good side of anonymity, but protected against the bad side? And I realize that that's just a super broad area.
It is,
but get to work on it.
It is, but what I hear is, if you want to share, it's in your face. If you want to report, you're digging around trying to find the place to report. So there is this question about, I mean, we know all sites manipulate us. They're manipulating us in one direction, and in some ways discouraging us in another direction. So I think there is sort of a broader set of design questions that we have to look at, yeah.
Yeah, we have a similar design architecture conundrum, which is, so we're trying to annotate, to make a layer of annotation over the web. The question is, should everything be annotated, right? And if not, if you say, I don't want you to annotate my blog or my personal content, how do you signal that to annotation services? maybe robots TXT type of thing. How does that work? But also, how do we make it so that things that should be up for annotation are always open to annotation, right? So if I am the government of, I don't know, Turkey or whatever, just to mention one.
Just to mention one.
And that government decides that they don't want their website annotated. I should be able to do it anyway if I'm a researcher and academic. So that's the problem we have.
So you mentioned earlier that someone in the room has probably trolled. I'm that guy.
Hi there.
I have a fantastic trolling resume, and I'm not proud of it all. I've been banned from 20 IRC channels and websites. I've said really hateful and horrible things. And I think that a lot of what you guys are talking about is kind of brigading and setting the squad after the person and banning them. And when I think about my own psyche 15 years ago when I was doing these things, that would just encourage me. I think that maybe the discussion is to be focused on not how do you attack someone back who's doing those things, but how do you stop them from doing them in the first place? And I have no idea. I really don't. I know that with the emotional maturity that I gained in the 15 years since I was doing these things, I've realized how horrible they were. But I don't know how to go back in time and say to 15-year-old Paul, shut up.
So it raises an interesting point, and the work that's been going on in that area is all about cyberbullying. So there is a fairly rich literature of which I think is totally aimed at like people in school and projects in school, and there's training for bystanders, and there's and what works and doesn't work, I have no idea, but it is extraordinary how much work is going on, but it's very, very insular, aimed in a very narrow way, and I don't know if it works, and I also don't know whether and how you could deliver that kind of message in an effective way to adults. But I think it hasn't been completely explored. I mean, there are some research-based things that apparently work. And I don't know whether there are ideas there that can be generalized out of the captive population of students to other communities. But I think it's a really good point. How we deal with trolls, how we I'm just curious. I know I've got some students here who are already working on projects. Do they want to talk about them? Okay.
Today I actually was reading the news, and there is now this law apparently that's been passed in India by 2017. There's going to be a panic button that's going to be made to be put on all mobile phones. And so that, women who might be in danger can hit that button.
Is that physical danger?
So
that's physical danger. Right.
And so my first concern really is the fact that this will be for smartphones, which is only owned by 10% of India. Probably the percentage more for women is less.
Right.
They're trying to enforce it on feature phones, but only 7 to 10% are really equipped to do so. Anyway, to move away from that, it's just what I'm curious about. I mean, firstly, my other concern with this whole policy that's been put down is that there's no sound data policy behind it. So where is this information going to go? How is it really going to be harnessed? But then the other thing is that here you're talking about physical danger. Then how can we really use the internet, or have there been examples of the internet kind of helping with that? And then the thing is, once we get all this information, it's like there are things that have to actually change in the public space, such as like newer bus routes, or seating areas for women, or cameras, or law enforcement being funneled in certain ways. Anyway, like my question really is, have any of you in your experiences ever seen or had examples maybe of technology that started in one place, moved on to like cyberspace, and then moved back into the public space arena?
No, I'm really curious about that. I'm curious about that as well. Is that an answer or is it a question?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
That's the next question.
Okay.
I was just curious as to.
Yeah.
I guess not.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's my question as well, because I see these programs, they're like bystander training programs, and they've gone through research, but they're not aimed necessarily at what we're dealing with here. And so a lot of this sort of offline work, which has been going a lot longer, I think it's a research question.
I have an answer.
You have an answer. Okay, hold on a minute.
So there's a couple of cool projects that are, two that are run sort of by the same organization. One is called iHoloback, which is an app that is for street harassment. And so people could see it, and whenever they encountered something, it's sort of a crowdsourced map of this. And then they also sort of started to build in social support for whenever someone was facing street harassment, they would be able to get support through that app. And then they started another project called HeartMob, that's around Twitter, that's sort of whenever you are harassed online, they're trying to deploy that same sort of network in order to get sort of immediate support right then. So those are the two projects that have been pretty successful.
Has somebody done, I do know about these, but I don't know whether they've done research on them, or I mean, it's just anecdotal at this point. I'm always worried with all of these apps that you can holler back at the trolls, or you could also holler back at the woman who dared to like have an opinion on a sports site. So why aren't these technical solutions not a double-edged sword? I mean,
well, I would say so. Jill Diamond, who has a PhD from University of Michigan's high school, is someone who's done a lot of research in these communities.
Excellent.
She's published a lot of work in the Computer Support and Cooperative Work Conference and the PI conference too.
Great.
On these apps. So
great.
Yeah, there's some people doing some really fantastic research.
That's more stuff to look at. More stuff to look at. Other questions? Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to respond to your query
please.
about, Marco Civil, the bill that was passed in the internet law in Brazil. So it's one of the most progressive internet laws that we've seen kind of come together with different stakeholders that were flown from all over the world to kind of come together and patch it out. So they actually, so if someone gets harassed online, the public prosecutor will get in touch with Twitter, and then Twitter will have to release, and it becomes a public record. So they have a system that kind of ties the tools to law enforcement.
Interesting. All right. It's your turn. It's definitely your turn.
So I just was thinking about this in terms of responses to harassment before an event and after an event, and the time scales involved. So after an event, there's immediate things that can be done, like blocking a user or reporting harassment on a platform, and then in the longer term, these things perhaps are restorative justice in terms of like taking legal actions to address it. And then in the pre-event side, there's like anti-cyberbullying laws that are coming out. It doesn't really seem like there's anything like near term the event that exists in order to dissuade or maybe that's wrong.
Oh, yeah. No, it's something that I think a lot of platforms are looking into, a lot of people are looking into, is a little bit more automatic detection of this sort of stuff.
I want to stay over here just because we've got we're actually dealing with that.
And so, like, there's a lot of programs and algorithms out there to sort of find spam, right? And Wikipedia has, I don't know if you ever look at the recent changes on Wikipedia, there's this thing called ClueBot, and ClueBot is sort of a machine learning process where it looks at what human editors revert as obvious vandalism, and it sort of builds up a library based on that, and eventually it starts reverting things itself. Hopefully we can keep it under control. But I mean, and so we're now looking at why can't we apply the same philosophy to the comments that people are making on Wikipedia? I mean, it's fairly easy to create a library of comments that are hurtful, that are abusive. And so why can't we have some detection, some flagging? And this gets into, you get into free speech issues very quickly with this one. And it's something that we're working on. If any of you guys want to get involved, because like we're definitely not proprietary about any of this. And so if anyone wants to get into that, we've got a project started on that one. But other platforms are thinking about it too, and lots of people are thinking about that. But I think maybe that's sort of answering like, sort of.
Like if it prevented people from posting the
Or flagging it so that people can deal with it quickly. I mean, one problem we have with Wikipedia is that there's little shady corners, dusty corners where abuse happens and someone finds out about it 3 months later, you know.
I don't think we can hit subreddits, but we have students working on this. I'm very excited to say.
So me, Lisa, and Kristen, we're actually in one machine learning class right now, and as part of our science project, this is what we are kind of building. Basically, right now, how the moderation works, somebody posts a comment, and then the bystanders are actually posting them as like a news or something, and then the moderators come into picture and see whether it's actually abuse or an insulting comment, and then the deal, when actions take place. But this is more of a reactive approach. What we are kind of coming up is how can we use the previous historical data to actually find what can be an insulting, a potential insulting or an abusive comment, and prevent the users from actually posting it. But I mean that's a question to you guys actually, that like to what level the companies can actually force users, moderating their kind of moderate this behavior. Like they can't really just stop them, or can they like give warning messages or things like that? So like to what extent can companies can actually change this kind of behavior?
Yeah, I think there's a big spectrum. I mean, like private companies reserve the right to just zap an account and zap a comment when they want to, right?
Which, come on, 205, they have the right to do, right? Yeah, so they can, but Randa, do you have other ideas about like the steps that you could use a machine learning to do?
I don't have a good solution for this, but Ian and Robin and I did kind of an investigation of like how can we protect free speech and identify these times, these moments in the technical innovation class that Deirdre taught us here. And it seems like this might be the moment at which you insert the empathy teaching moment. And rather than preventing them from posting it, detect it, and before they can post it, then insert something here, right? Like that takes research to figure out what would be the most useful thing, but like, hey, we've detected that this might be a harassing thing. Maybe that will be, they'll be like, yes, that's what I'm going for.
Right.
But
that can be tested.
Maybe don't use that word, right? Like we don't want to use that word. There needs to be something there, but maybe rather than preventing them from posting, because I value on Twitter that you can say anything, right? And obviously we don't want this harassment to happen, but that's part of what makes a platform great, is that things are allowed. So
I do kind of like the teachable moment, and I suppose you could have an escalation, right?
And well, it's not going to solve every situation, but how can we at least catch some of the people who just, like what Jen was talking about, like with This American Life, this is the moment where you show them it's a human on the other end.
Do we know any projects that do this right now?
Well, sorry. Go ahead.
So on the topic of teachable moments, there's a couple of interesting real-world examples. Most people haven't run into this, but on Twitter, in certain abuse flows, if your account is suspended, you may have to take some action, like deleting a tweet to get it unsuspended. So that's going to like take this action to kind of show remorse. And I think there's like good and bad. A lot of people see it as really kind of controlling, but yeah. But I think it does show some results. And similarly, there's a forum software called Discourse that I use to moderate a forum. And if your post gets flagged off, you can wait 10 minutes and edit your post to get it like restored.
Nice.
And of course, it could be abusive again, and then you just get flagged off again. But it works very well.
There's a new project called Civil Comments, I think, and what they do is you can post a comment, but then you have to rate or evaluate other two comments that other people have done and give them feedback, and then you auto-evaluate your own comment. So it forces you to think about the quality of other people's comments and yours before you post it.
Yeah. Where are we? Yes.
So
Jeannie.
this is a question, but also kind of an answer maybe to all the people here in the room. Like I think it's huge for everyone, a lot of people here, that you're really itching to find solutions. And I also kind of noticed, especially Erica, you mentioned that you have a page with a lot of solutions that you've come across over the years. And so I was thinking if we created at the iSchool a site where you guys can post
absolutely.
Yeah, I think people are always open to saying they need help. I'm just wondering, I mean, you know, I was hoping we'd have time to break into small groups. I expected that we would not, and I don't think we do. But are there other sort of things going through your mind in terms of projects, collaborations through the legal clinic, fundable projects? Yes.
At this point, we'll take away the microphones.
Okay. We'll talk about it, you know, I don't know how long I can hold you here. I can tell you is just leave if you need to leave. Even you. I mean, I can, you know, maybe pick it up your kids or something.
This is a question for Erica that the accessing the legal system is one issue, but then the question about whether or not the remedies the legal system provides are actually meaningful. And in my experience with the sorts of violations we're dealing with, they're just not.
Yep.
Right? And so, you know, tools that help people find and remove pictures, tools that like, are there things that are kind of self-help for the sort of stuff that you see that are not yet available? That I mean, all the content filtering that you see on something like YouTube, right, which is the pre-filtering, can you catch the things before? I mean, you see a lot of that in the content area of dealing with intellectual property. You see the development of all sorts of things that help us engage in identification of things that might be, you know, in violation of somebody else's rights, or ability to go and find all the images that look like this images, or all your right. And are there things that you see that could be borrowed from there that don't yet exist, or other things that would be helpful?
So my focus is making the legal system work in the best way that it can. And what we haven't seen,
it just doesn't provide meaningful support.
Except for
Actually,
restraining
Erica,
orders.
you should argue with that
Because here's what happens. So you get a revenge pornographer, and we could sue him so easily for so many civil claims, right? Why would we do that? He's broke. But you write this demand letter because you really can go get a same-day restraining order, and he doesn't want that same-day restraining order against him, because that can be teed up as a criminal case, and then he's violating a restraining order. So the restraining order is so powerful, and that's what we use to then get a settlement agreement that it has all of these restraining provisions and assigns the copyright and stuff like that.
The images are out there, and they're usually recopied all over the place.
Yeah.
And their restraining order doesn't make him go, oh, there you go, that, does it?
No.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of time. So I had a student, and her images went viral, and her mom spent 500 hours taking them down. There would be a really great way to make that not a manual project, but a way to just take down stuff. Yeah.
And other things along those lines?
Well, I mean,
things
there's
that you end up doing manually, or you see like the kind of self-help that victims end up having to do, that you're like, God, there's got to be an app for that. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just working with the companies, and this whole idea that it's good for business to have like a safe place where people share is pretty new still. So I think there's going to be a lot of activity in terms of the tools that companies are really making now.
Anybody else? Ideas?
Yeah. So one thing that I had to think about, especially in terms of this, the algorithmic filtering that we've been talking about a little bit, and the comparisons to email and spam, I think are pretty apt. And with email and spam, like we all have our own individual spam filters. We don't sort of well, email's not sort of as centralized of a system. And it makes me sort of really, and that's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. And one of the things I really like about Blog Together and the blog bots and that sort of thing is that you don't have to have one canonical machine learning system or socio-technical system that makes those decisions for everyone all at once, but you can have something that's more, people can opt in to different ones and people can negotiate. And I think that like that sort of like looking at it as very similar to the email problem, which is something that even the most like very like dedicated like libertarians who do freedom of speech are often very fine filtering spam. It's just when you get to other kinds of content, they're not. And so I'm wondering if you have any plans about sort of taking those sort of technologies and implementing them, or like ways that you could think that would work.
sounds like folks here at the high school are working on just that. I think that's really interesting work.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I don't know, just personally, that in the research I'm doing is that when you get into tools that would address a more complex problem, they have so much more capacity for abuse because they're dealing with stuff that can fall into gray areas. And so, yeah, I think maybe this is the design question we're talking about, you know, when we just have to forget about profits and forget about, you know, 10,000 new users and just really think about, you know, how to balance a powerful tool against, you know, the damage it could do. And unfortunately, I think, you know, the business end of things does get in the way of developing those tools sometimes. I mean, you know, for the foundation, it's not quite so much an issue, but I mean, if you had to go to your shareholders and say, you know, this is really going to hurt our business in the next 2 years, it's just not going to happen, right? It's just not going to happen.
Right.
Do we know that?
Do you guys
Well, I don't know
that?
that.
Because the companies, if you're a user-generated company, you're immune from liability. So why would you spend money on any tools because you don't have to?
Well, because women are the primary shoppers, right? And I think so.
So it's changing.
Yeah,
it's changing, but recently, I mean, it took years and years to change any non-consensual porn even, you know, it took years, in Danielle's book. So it is changing, but they don't have to do anything. So that's why there hasn't been a huge investment in any of these tools.
I'd also like to say, you know, machine learning techniques are actually very expensive to implement in practice. It's a lot of engineering. And a lot of companies want a solution that's going to work for everybody. You know, we can just make it work, it's magical. But I think user empowerment is both cheaper and often more effective. You know, people who are under attack are more motivated to find solutions. And they might be willing to say, turn off comments from people I don't know. And that's cheap and fast and often the most effective thing.
One of my favorite stories from this space is actually quite old, and I attribute it to Randy Farmer, which is Disney has had a chat tool, or they did in the past, for kids, for ages. And the only way you could chat was by like stringing together pre-constructed phrases. You could not enter any of your own content. But it didn't take long for people to put together strings of, you know, pre-existing phrases, and, you know, for adults to come in and harass children with what seemed like innocuous words and, you know, somehow connote meanings that we will not discuss here. So, you know, letting the bots do the work, like maybe there's some promise there, but there's still going to be a lot of gray areas and a lot of human touch, I would argue, that needs to happen before the bots can certainly, or the machine learning can take care of all these problems.
I think the spam model that Sue was talking about might give us some, like instruction. That, yeah, the spam model, everyone has their own spam filter. You can create your own spam filter, but then there is also a lot of there's the spam house blacklist, and you needed those also shared blacklists.
Right.
And you also needed there were standards developed so that you could report, oh, your ISP is sending tons of spam. Like you have to go back to the source and have some common way to report it so that they can also take it down on the sort of supply side. And so it seems like spam, there was no single point where we were going to prevent all of the spam.
Right.
It took the personal filters and shared filters and reporting back to the source. So I'm not sure how many of those we have in the abuse reporting space, but
well, I think you bring up ISPs is a really big one because as time goes by, you're getting better responses from law enforcement, you're getting better responses from platforms, but ISPs sort of remain this arm's length organization, and as you say, they will help you out with copyright issues with spam. But,
well, the copyright holders don't think they're helping with copyright.
Well, maybe not so much, but I mean, you'll at least get a response. But I mean, I think as we've had experiences, if we talk to an ISP saying, you know, a user is bouncing around your network, doing horrible, you know, saying horrible things to our users, they're just like, wow. And I mean,
yeah, I think there's a lot of
James could probably say better, but I don't think we've ever had a strong reaction from an ISP. Right.
Yeah. I think it's the financial cost. It's also they spend unbelievable amounts of resources trying to deal with copyright, particularly because there's so much automation and using these third parties who are just picking up the fingerprinting and demanding that all of these things get sent new case on that. And I don't think that, what I see a lot of times is when you have something like that, like the responses around copyright, and it's a very adversarial kind of environment around copyright, that choices to take things down for other reasons wind up being a discussion about the precedent, right? Like we don't block this, we don't filter that. Well, what is it that copyright wants? They want automatic filtering, they want take down, stay down. And so we're also doing this in the context of other really big policy fights, right? What was SOPA about? It was about blocking and having legal orders to do it. So I think these things are all wrapped up with each other. And what can I say to the women in the room? We're not as powerful as Hollywood, but we should be. But perhaps using better strategies. We have gone to almost 5:45. I hope that we have some food for thought. The semester is ending, so it's not like I can say, let's all get together tomorrow. But we will figure out a way that we can sort of start creating a list. We invite you all to help us with ideas. And thank you, and thank our panelists. Terrific. Thank you, Jennifer.